Here we go. Welcome into another edition of Inside Carolina's Game Plan Podcast. I tell you what, time flies. I felt like I just talked to you guys, and it's been a week already. North Carolina Central. We're sponsored by Johnny T-Shirt and Congruity. That's Jason Staples in the middle, Greg Barnes on the right. I'm, of course, Tommy Ashley. Jason, I'll come to you first here. I don't usually do this. Since I talked to Greg yesterday, I'm going to put you on the seat early. North Carolina Central. Greg will highlight it because his son is now at Elon. Elon beat the brakes off of Central last weekend. So I entitled this, What Carolina Can Accomplish on Saturday. Let's start at the top, win. Start at the second to the top, stay healthy. Given those, what do you see this game Saturday accomplishing for North Carolina?
I think the main thing out of this game is the opportunity for a lot of younger, more inexperienced players to play a lot of football, and to get and what you hope for in this kind of game is you're working the kinks out. So there are a couple of young guys who've played some snaps that so far have not quite made the leap. You can see they're a little behind. I mean, I'll call out a guy right now that I know can play better football, and that's Caleb LaValle, right? So far in 2 games, when he's been on the field, he's given up some plays. He's been just a little bit behind in terms of processing and, getting guys on the ground as a tackler. This is the kind of game where you give that guy 3/4 of the football game. You give that guy 45 snaps, 50 snaps, and you give him a chance to get a lather up and get into the flow of the game, to start seeing things and moving a little bit differently when the lights are really on. And similar with some of the backup linemen, some of these guys haven't played a lot of football yet. Some of them should have played more football by now in terms of being more ready to play earlier in their careers. But you give some opportunities. I can see on the defensive side somebody like Laura getting 25, 30 reps. You want to give those guys opportunities to earn their way onto the football field, because they've talked a lot about how they want to play more players. And they've been playing more players, but they've not played them quite as much as I think they'd like. This is what you're preaching to some of these guys all week in the meeting rooms. This is your opportunity to show me I can trust you. This is your opportunity to earn yourself some extra reps. This is your opportunity to get to where next week, and then 2 weeks from now or 3 weeks from now against Duke, all of a sudden you can go in there and I know I can give you a drive or two and I can trust you. This is the opportunity for those guys to earn that. That's what this game is really about for me, as much as anything else. And, beyond that, early in the game, you want to get your receivers and your quarterback some opportunities to make some rhythm throws and get into some rhythm. I mean, you treat that like a passing scrimmage to some extent. I think that's something else that you have to do here. And that's not to disrespect your opponent, but you do have to recognize, like, look, if Elon beats this team 41-19, you expect to be able to do what you want with them, and you plan for, okay, these are areas that we need to keep working on them. If anything isn't quite right, then you can always start to go back to the basics of running the football or whatever, and you still need to do some of that. But to me, you get the opportunity to work on some stuff you're going to need moving forward.
Yeah, we could end the show right there. Realistically, we are contractually obligated to talk for an hour. We're close to it. Greg,
we're not going an hour today.
Greg, well, Jason's got us 5 minutes in with all the deets. But Greg, when you look at this game on the schedule, to Jason's point, I think it's you play the starters to get their lathers up, to get their action in. And we can talk about the quarterback position, but you really need to see which backups can help you in case injuries happen. And there's been some of those already.
Yeah, for sure. And let's don't overlook. I've got a cord where it's not supposed to be. Let's not overlook the one of the points that Jason made there is that you want to come out and you want to execute perfectly with your ones. Yes, you want to do all the depth stuff for sure, but I think we all thought the Charlotte game would be a little bit more lopsided than what it was, and North Carolina really had a test in that first half, especially early in the third quarter after Charlotte was able to score. Which is okay. I mean, that's what the purpose of the game is to work through some things and figure out where you need to get better. And that's what they did. And I think in this game Saturday, because Central is not a very difficult opponent. I mean, they didn't score until 2 minutes left in the third quarter against Elon. They're down 21-zip, I think, at halftime. One of their scores was a kickoff return. So that just kind of a mess offensively. And so this is the team that you should be able to come out and really lay the lumber. And that has nothing to do with your backups. That's your ones. You have to dominate, as we talk about a lot, on both sides of the line of scrimmage and really feed Marion Hampton. And I'm sure every running back available will be able to get some runs. But let Hampton get greased up early and let Connor Harrell have some more success. If he's only started one game in the regular season, yes, he got credit for the ball game last year before he got hurt, but you want to stack. We talked about that last week. Keep stacking performances, keep stacking reps. And I really think the first half, the first quarter especially, Mack talks about playing to a standard. That's your opportunity. Come out and put this team away. Alabama did that very well in their opening game of the year, and they scored on the first, 10 possessions? And that's kind of what you want to see, is see how dominant you can be against an inferior opponent. And that's what your ones have to do. And then from there, if they do what they're supposed to do, then you can really start working on the twos and the threes, which will be valuable come November.
Yeah, sort of like Clemson did to App State. Good gracious. They just absolutely blitzed them. Jason, let's talk about quarterback right fast because I think it's important to Greg's point and to getting all these reps for Harold is what's enough? I mean, the thumbnail I chose for this show has Jacoby Criswell handing off to Charleston French, we know what I think about backup quarterbacks, but what is enough for Connor Harrell in a game like this? How much can you accomplish with him in a game like this?
I think some of that is determined by how well he executes. Right? If this is the kind of game where it should be 21-0 with 2 minutes gone in the second quarter. And at that point, that ball game's over. That team's not coming. They're not scoring 21 points on you in that amount of time, and you're not scoring the rest of that game. That's what it should be. If it's 28-0 in the middle of the second quarter, and your quarterback is 11 for 13 for 220 yards, you start thinking about giving him one series in the third quarter and moving on to the next guy to give him some opportunities because you're going to need to have him ready in case. But if you're getting to the end of the first half and it's 13-0 or 13-6, and your quarterback's thrown it to the other team twice, and he's not quite looked real comfortable, and he's, let's say 6 of 13 for 75 yards, 1 touchdown, 2 picks, you're looking at giving him the whole third quarter. Because you got to get right. So the best thing that could happen for North Carolina in this game is that Connor Harrell goes out there and goes 11 for 13 for 200 yards in the first half. You don't need to play him after that. You're not gonna get much better from him after that in terms of progressing against that defense. He's shown he can execute crisply. Give him one drive past the second past the halftime break just to stay in that rhythm. Get him out of there and see what you got with the next guy. But again, a lot of that is contingent on that. Now, one thing I would say is I would come into this game not planning to give it to Omarion more than 5 times. I'm bubble wrapping that guy. Omarion Hampton does, like, giving him 10, 12 carries in this game. You're just giving him more opportunities to get nicked up in a game that you really probably don't need him for. I dress him. I have him out there for the first drive, maybe 2 drives, and I'm trying to kind of minimize how much he even touches it on those drives. And ideally, I have Omarion Hampton out of there after, by the end of the first quarter. And again, 5, 6 carries, maybe. Ideally. I'm not sure that's what they're going to do. I mean, Mack historically has preferred to kind of reward his top line guys like that, to give him a few carries early, give him 10, 12 carries early and then kind of pull him. But to me, what you saw from Gauss last week, you can win with him. And you're going to need him down the stretch. And giving Hampton an extra 5, 6 carries in this game and giving him maybe a little more wear and tear for later doesn't really do you any good. Whereas, those 5 or 6 carries are going to matter come November. You want to save those carries. And he already got a little dinged last week. So to me, that, Omarion, kind of put him in bubble wrap as early as you can. A guy like Harrell, who's still young and still developing and processing, you really go off of how well he's doing. And the better he's doing, the less he should play in this game.
Well, I've got 2 questions to that then. The first one probably is a brief answer, and then I'll get into the heavier stuff. But with Connor having so little experience, and I don't want to say he looked inexperienced last week. Maybe that's the nice way of saying it. It didn't look like it came easy to him. It didn't look like he was as instinctual as maybe you would expect him to be, which is probably part of the process. Given that, do you go ahead and just let him stretch it out a little bit, maybe through 3 quarters, just to give him reps, to build reps before you get too close to ACC play?
So knowing that I have one more game against a little bit better opponent than this one, that, he's going to get an opportunity before ACC play to do that. Again, I do that if I feel like he's struggling. I let him stretch it out a little bit. But if I feel like through the first drive of the third quarter that he's actually been clicking and that he's been putting the ball on the money and he's been processing well enough and looking comfortable, then I'm pulling him. But like you said, I mean, the question is, last week he didn't look super comfortable. Looked like the game was still going really fast for him. And if he still looks like the game is just flying by against NC Central, first, second drive of the third quarter, he might go, okay, we need to keep sending him out there a little bit. Just let things slow down a little bit for him. And, maybe you do that. But I do think the other extenuating factor on this is you also know you've got to have your backup ready. Right? I mean, yep. You are one play away from Jacoby Criswell being your starting quarterback. And you know this. So you also need to get him into the game at a point where it's not completely Bush League to have him throw the football and run the regular offense. So again, ideally, Connor goes out there, and this is a lesser opponent. He goes out there comfortable, cuts him up, throws it well, throws it comfortably. You get him out of there early in the third quarter, and you give Jacoby at least a quarter and, maybe quarter into the mid fourth quarter, and, let him throw 2 or 3 drives, let him run your regular offense just to get him some lather. Ideally, that's what you're doing. That's how I'm thinking. And as a coordinator, I'd be telling my coach, I got to know what I got with this other guy, because look, I like my starter. I like what Harrell brings to the table on a lot of things, and I know he needs to get better, but I also know he runs the ball. I also know that there's going to be some physicality in the rest of the schedule. I need to make sure that this other guy gets just enough reps that he's seen live bodies in this offense too. So, and knowing again that I have a second game coming where I probably play Connor Harrell even if I'm up in that game through full 3 quarters, because that's a little bit better defense, a little closer to what you're going to see in the ACC. I probably default to getting him out earlier, all things being equal.
You make a key point there. In previous years with Howe and Drake May, when Carolina has not had adequate depth at quarterback, one thing that we heard from the coaching staff was, all right, they like to run, they're effective running. We don't need them to run because we don't want to risk them getting hurt. And you could do that with Sam and Drake pretty easily because they were such prolific passers. Well, the whole kit and caboodle with Connor is he's a pretty good passer, but what separates him and what makes him maybe better than average is his ability to get out and run and stress the defense in that way. The other question I had for you, Jason, you did one of your video series this week, and it was really good talking about Chip, especially last week, really set up Connor to have success outside the hashes. And if you look at the Pro Football Focus, it kind of backs that up. He only attempted 4 passes in the middle of the field,
one of which was very ill-advised.
Exactly. With the opponent that you have, is this a game where you say, all right, we're going to give you opportunities to show what you can do down the field, down the middle of the field, just to see if you can do it against live action before we move on and say, okay, well, for sure, we're just going to stick on the edges for you?
Yes. Yeah, I think you have to. Again, it's the same reason I was just saying where you've got your backup now with Jacoby.
Yeah.
Okay, I got to know a little bit. I've not worked with this guy much, right? As a coordinator, as a quarterback coach. I haven't worked a bunch with him. I got to know what I got when the lights go on as a backup. And I got to, have a little bit of sense there. And the same thing's true with Connor. Okay. We've protected him a little bit. We've catered to what he's most comfortable doing. But what happens if we call a Mills play? Mills concept, which is, that little dig in front of a deep post. Can he read the safety there and make that throw and stick it in there on the dig, or throw it over the top on the post? Because if so, that helps our offense. We can now go play action, hold a safety, and maybe throw over the top. Is he comfortable doing that? Or is this something we're just really going to have to steer clear of? Is he comfortable reading 2 windows on the deep over route? Maybe a half roll action. Are there some things that we can add in and just see how he processes? Maybe you've done it in practice and it hasn't quite gone as well as you'd like. But what happens when the lights are on and it's not that good of a defense? He's probably going to have enough time to throw most of the time. Is he going to get comfortable? Is he going to get to where I can say, you know what? Chips are down. I might be able to call this and get a big play if the defense is right. You got to know. And I think you still stick with most of what he's comfortable with, but that one you've got to give him a handful of plays where he's going to have those opportunities.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about Connor Harrell, Jacoby Criswell, and the Carolina quarterback room. I do have a question from the message boards. I told people, and it's on the same subject, so it's going to be the last question on this subject. Bull Hill on the Tar Pit Premium. As number 2 quarterback in the system for 2 years, should we expect Connor to be further along in pocket presence, progressions, etc., or maybe he's was never in the pocket in high school, so his development has been far behind, or he's not built to be a pocket passer and the learning curve is going to be long and steep? Jason, a couple people asked, why is he not comfortable yet? And I'm like, because he hasn't played. And it's one thing to practice, it's not playing. But you just sort of answered that question before we move off this quarterback stuff.
Yeah. I don't think we have enough data to answer this for sure. To be able to say something definitively. Because there is a certain innateness, or at least if it's not innate, by the time guys get to this point, it's either there or it's probably never going to be there, to comfort in the pocket with bodies flying around or whatever. And, maybe, and part of the reason it sticks out with Connor not being as comfortable with that is that the guy that was taking snaps in Chapel Hill the last couple of years was about as good as it ever gets in that. A guy that just, looked as calm and comfortable with muddy pockets and a mess around him as anybody. And, to some degree with Drake, that was just, he walked in the door as a true freshman and his footwork and such wasn't real good. But one thing was he just was a baller when it came to that intuition and that feel. And again, I've compared, I don't know how many times this is, but if you've got on your Staples bingo card, Staples compares a quarterback to a point guard. Go ahead and check that off on your bingo card, or go ahead and drink in the drinking game. But certain time, like when you recruit a point guard to college basketball, if that guy midway through his freshman year just doesn't look comfortable, handling the ball and breaking defenses down and finding ways to pass the rock, that might just mean he's not that guy. Right? That's not what he's going to be comfortable doing. But that's not always true. Sometimes it does take a little bit of time, but more often than not, there's a innateness to that point guard who gets there, and Ty Lawson is Ty Lawson from the time he steps on campus, right? So, those guys are different. And the reason I say we don't have enough data is that there is some growth that happens. And I also know, from people within the program that he was basically ignored his first fall on campus. He got basically no reps and really didn't do anything that would get him healthy or help or comfortable in that. So I think there's plenty of room to grow, but if anybody's going to expect, even by the time he's a senior, for him to look anything like Drake May in the pocket, I just don't think that's realistic.
Yeah. So the board member asked the question about learning curve. It goes both ways, because as Jason said, going from Drake May to any other quarterback is going to be a step down. And then when you add in Sam Howell, Carolina fans, I don't think, have a full appreciation yet of what they enjoyed for 5 years with those two guys in the backfield.
I tried saying that in my previews this year.
Yeah, sure.
Guys, no matter how good it gets, it's not going to be that.
And through 2 games, it's evident. And so I think people need to understand that that doesn't mean that Max Johnson and Connor Harrell are not good quarterbacks by no stretch. But it does mean that they're more normal than what preceded them. And so you have to give them some time. You have to be patient and understand, like with Connor, it may take him a little bit of time. As Jason said, we don't have the data quite yet that we need. Give him some time. Let him learn the ropes. He wasn't expected to really play much this year because Max was going to be the guy. Well, now he's got to play. And so they are on warp speed trying to get him up to speed. And there's going to be some good plays and there's going to be some bad plays. But what you hope is that as you get further along and in the ACC play, the goods outweigh the bad at an increasing degree. And that's all you can hope for. If you're hoping for him to be an elite guy by the time Duke rolls around, I'm sorry, it's not going to happen.
It's like we often hear the quote, people are prisoners of their own success. Well, guys like Connor and Max Johnson in North Carolina are prisoners of other quarterback success. Like you mentioned, Drake and them, is they are being compared constantly to those guys, and it's just not a fair comparison. But as Jason said all along, you can win with these guys. You just might not win in the Lamborghini. You might have to win in the old 65 Chevy. That's just better than, and just be better. So it's an interesting discussion.
One of the things we've seen from Connor is that he has certain things already in the tool bag that you can win with. Mm-hmm. Right?
Absolutely.
He's able to do things that already you can build around, and you can use a lot of that skill set. The real key here is how much can he add in terms of being able to win from the pocket, and how quickly can he get to where the game starts to slow down for him. Mm-hmm. And again, for certain guys, they walk in that door and they're just intuitive, and the game moves slower for those guys.
Those are the it guys. They have it. It just they're born with
and that's
it.
That's why after Drake May's freshman spring at Carolina, I was going, that dude's that dude. And that's why when he came in, to be that next year starter, I'm going, look, this guy's going to make everybody forget about Sam Howell pretty quick, because some guys are just that dude. Just they walk in that way. Most guys aren't that dude.
Exactly.
And Connor Harrell is one of those guys who's going to need some time for things to slow down and get a little bit more comfortable. And the question is, again, how long is it going to take? And for some guys, they never quite get there. We don't have enough data to know how long it's going to take or whether he's going to completely get there in some of those areas. But again, he's already at a place where you can build around a lot of the skill set he has and win football games. So that's a good floor to start from.
Tommy, to build on your automobile analogy, when I was in high school, I bought a 1980 Chevy Love Truck, a little small, mid-sized vehicle for $500. Nice. And let me tell you, if I needed to get through some mud or I needed to scoot around town and load junk in the back, I could do it as well as anybody. But if you got me out on the interstate, that thing only had 4 gears. And so I would get over in that left lane in 4th gear, and I'd be trucking along at 55 miles per hour as fast as I could go. That was my limitation. So I didn't ever take the interstate. I found other ways to go, and it could be just as effective as some of the nicer cars.
Listen to Greg Barnes, man. I mean, you don't always have to be flashy. All you got to do is win.
Yep.
Caleb asked in the chat, did it have a camper top, Greg?
No, it did not.
That would have been some Grateful Dead.
This was the 90s. This wasn't the 70s.
We're talking with Jason Staples and Greg Barnes on the game plan. North Carolina hosts North Carolina Central, 6 o'clock Saturday. I'm going to go ahead and talk about Johnny T-shirt.
Oh, yeah.
Get Johnny T-shirt. They're due. They got great gear for Carolina fans. Look, even if you're not a Carolina fan, you can go in Johnny T-shirt and you're going to buy some Carolina gear because they're so nice in there. They're so helpful. Go to Johnny T-shirt online at johnnytshirt.com. If you can't get to East Franklin Street, if you're in town for these games, 3 straight games in Kenan Stadium, this being the second of 3, go to Franklin Street. Get you a beer at He's Not or wherever your favorite establishment is, and go to Johnny T-shirt and let them hook you up with all the swag. National guys will pay the bills. We'll be right back with more game plan. All right, boys. I want to talk about the schedule aspect here, but I don't want to do it quite yet because one thing I do want to talk about is the defensive lines or the lines of scrimmage, offensive and defensive. And Jason, I'll start with you again. North Carolina is likely going to be without their starting center today, or excuse me, on Saturday. And we'll see how that injury plays out. Greenberg, the D3 transfer, played the majority of the snaps after Blasky went out last week. Bo Burks is another guy that's played some center. When you're looking, and Aiden Banfield got nicked up, when you're looking at this offensive line and the snap counts we've seen, where is North Carolina here? We've talked about playing the depth elsewhere. Where is North Carolina playing the depth in the offensive line? Because in the preseason, we talked about they are one catastrophic injury away from either the middle or the edges to having problems. Well, how have they fared so far?
Not great, Bob. I mean, we started the season saying that they did have more depth on the defensive line than they've had in the last couple of years, and that was a huge deal. But they still really couldn't afford a whole lot in the ways of guys getting nicked up there, and they didn't make it through week 2 without having basically 3 guys go down, and one, to my eye, it looked like it's going to be a while. I mean, and Blasky is really important for them. He was really important the first couple games. So yeah, not great. And the other thing is that you still don't really have offensive tackle depth. Ja'Kiah Leftwich is still a work in progress as a backup there. I know coming into the season, they really wanted to be able to rotate Leftwich in a good bit at right tackle behind Trevion Green, basically to make sure that Trevion Green, who's not, in terms of the ability to play, let's say 80 snaps and play all 80 snaps at a very high pace, Trevion Green is still not quite there. And, the idea was that you can kind of split 70-30 or something like that and get Leftwich some reps there and make sure that you're getting the best out of that position. But Leftwich, when we were at the open practice, just wasn't ready. And, Janny Norwood is another guy that, needs to step forward a little bit. Young guy. They're going to have to figure out who's ready to play there. And the hard part here is you've got to play your starters on the offensive line long enough to give your quarterbacks and your backs adequate protection and holes and all that, even against a bad team, to be able to play. But you also don't want one of those guys to get nicked up at all where things are. I mean, that's the problem with football, right? It's a violent game. It's not a contact sport. It's a collision sport. And yeah, I mean, I look at that and I go, okay, Greenberg, you felt good about your depth coming in because, well, you got Greenberg if something goes wrong in a pinch, but you weren't counting on that happening in week 2. And, Banfield, major deal there. If he's slowed, you're limited there. And you kind of know what you have in Malik McGowan and Adorno at the backup guards. But I do think in this game, second half especially, you're going to need to see the other tackles. You're going to need to see the younger tackles and give them some opportunities because you're going to need to develop that depth.
Sampson and Green combined to play just over 80% of the snaps against Charlotte.
And that wasn't ideal. You really wanted to see those guys play about 65% maybe, less than 70%. That's not great. I mean, they really wanted Leftwich to kind of step forward. And to my eye in the practice that we were in, and I don't know how much you paid attention to that unit, Greg, but Leftwich, really impressive on the hoof, a lot of potential, but miles away from where, you kind of hoped he would be at that point. So, Norwood actually might be closer right now in terms of, readiness in that respect, which is not great because you're looking at a freshman, true freshman. So those guys need to be ready, though. They need to be able to steal some reps at different points just to, again, because you want to stay healthy at those spots, and they can't afford to lose a tackle.
I mean, you look at the injuries and how the injuries you get rolled up on and you could be done, and so it happens a ton. So that'll be something to watch against North Carolina Central and also against James Madison, frankly, where James Madison will be better. I have no idea how good they'll be simply because they've replaced everybody, but they'll clearly be better. So North Carolina's got some work to do there. Let me ask you a question from the chat, and Greg, I'll come to you on this. Jim Woodall. Jim is a legend. Where are you now, Jim? I see your picture here. You're in some island. I figure you're in Borneo on a yacht somewhere. But we'll take your question. What do we need to see from the UNC secondary against an opponent like Central? Greg?
Really, it's just eliminate busts. I think that was some of the issues against Charlotte, and that's communication. And that's a good opportunity this week be flawless in terms of communication. People are going to make plays. As Roy Williams is always saying, the other team has scholarship players too. And so there's going to be opportunities and there are going to be situations where other kids just make plays. They're going to make tough catches and those types of things. It happens. But you don't want them running free in the secondary, which indicates that there was some type of miscue that occurred. And that's really the main thing. Gene Chiswick's talked about it. Every defensive coordinator that Carolina's had, every defensive coordinator that's ever lived has talked about it. Kind of what you're hoping is that your front seven is effective enough to limit the exposure on the back end, and then you communicate well enough where you're not exposed and you're able to make plays. And then in this game on Saturday, Carolina has better athletes and more talented players than Central. And when you factor in that Central's offensive line was deceived against Elon, you would think the secondary is not going to have to do much of anything. It's going to be a pretty easy day for them as long as they communicate, because that quarterback for Central is not going to have much time to get any passes in.
This is a game where you really, as a defensive coordinator, you come in and you tell your players, like, normally we're not focused on outcomes, but y'all need to get shut out this week.
What I liked from Collins in the Monday press conference is that Charlotte quarterback, both of them actually made a couple bucket throws that were just dimes. And I'm not sure in phase, correct leverage, any of that would have made a matter, would have made a big deal in those type throws, a couple of those, especially against Caleb Cost. But Jason, he was constantly talking about, we got to get the leverage right and all that. How much does doing it right from the get-go play into a secondary's play? Like from the snap, you talked about Gene Chizik, Greg. Guys were running free against Gene Chizik's defense because Carolina was bailing out 15 yards deep, and they just run up and turn around. So, Jason, how important is straight from the snap in secondary play?
So leverage, I mean, anytime you talk to a good defensive coordinator, you're going to get the word leverage a lot. Leverage it's not quite everything on defense, but it's an awful lot. I mean, it comes down to things like, up front, which shoulder do you hit your proper gap with matters. Because okay, I'm hitting the B gap, and I need to hit it with this shoulder because this arm needs to be open so that I can make the tackle in the gap here as opposed to being stuck here. In the secondary, I was wide receiver. The number one thing you have to do as a wide receiver, the first thing you learn to do, is to use your releases and stem your routes to break down defensive backs' leverage. It's a leverage game. And again, let's go to basketball. Let's say you're going up against a guy who's really good driving the rock, but he happens to be more right-hand dominant, right? He doesn't go left real well. What are you going to do? You're going to set up on that right hand, and you're going to try to force him to go left. What can you not do? Let him overplay that little left move and get you out of your leverage, outside the frame, and let him cross you back to his right hand, and now all of a sudden he's going down the lane and he's dunking on you, right? It's all about maintaining the proper leverage to where you want your guy to go. And the way defenses are designed is every piece of leverage is designed to funnel the offensive player, the receiver or the running back, whoever's in the route. It's designed to funnel him to help, whether that's the sideline, whether that's another coverage player. It's basically you're trying to squeeze things to give the offense as little space as possible. And the offense is responding by trying to take away that leverage so that they can create as much space as possible and make it difficult for you to leverage them out of space. So, and actually two of the defensive plays that I highlighted in this week's film breakdown were two plays by the nickel corner by Caleb Cost, where he let the slot receiver beat him to his leverage. He's playing outside leverage in this context. His help, the guy he's funneling to, is that safety on the inside. Because what they're trying to do is prevent the ability to just throw that slot fade on the outside. And if that guy wants to run a slot fade or run some sort of seam, you're going to have to force him to come through your body. And then, maybe turn that into a seam, because on a seam, you've got that safety right inside. And if the quarterback throws that, you've got basically a double team. It's going to be really tough to fit that in. That safety may just come up and rob that, right? What you can't do is what happened there, which is you start with outside leverage. And I, as a wide receiver, I see outside leverage to begin with. And I'm also verifying. I'm checking other players' leverage at the snap and checking coverage. Like, okay, is he disguising? Because the next level is you line up on the outside leverage and you jump inside at the snap because you're not actually in the coverage that you want to present at the snap. And now the receiver has to kind of make that read and adjustment, like, oh, shoot, he's on inside leverage. I need to adjust my stem. I need to run this route differently. But he was sitting on the outside shoulder. This is clear outside leverage. So what am I doing as a wide receiver on a slot fade? I'm pressing at his leverage and I'm threatening him to make him widen a little bit. And then I'm coming back inside for a couple steps to make it look like that's where I want to go. And all I want him to do is to match me inside a little bit. And then I can stick my foot in the ground and pass him to his leverage. And now I've got him beat because that's where he didn't want me to go. And I'm there. And now I'm even, I'm leaving, right? That's how this works. The difficulty from that position is maintaining the leverage there and basically saying, look, yep, he's inside. He's going inside. I need to let him have a step to the inside because that's where I want him to go. That's really hard. And especially for young guys to go, okay, he's inside. Do I jump this at all? Do I come inside a little bit? Do I react to that? Or do I say, I'm sitting on my leverage? It's Top Gun. You never leave your wingman, right? You never abandon your leverage. You just never do it. And that's a huge thing that they're still drilling right now. And with the kind of defense that they like to play, that's going to be critical.
There you go. Inside baseball / football from Jason Staples here on the Game Plan Podcast. Congruity, second sponsor. We've got another local business turned national. Congruity. Do this. Go to matt@congruityhr.com. Get your small to mid-sized business assessment. You send them your stuff, right? Imagine doing this. Imagine packaging up all your thoughts on your business, sending it to somebody, and then you say, well, how can you help me? And then they tell you how they can help you. And not only do they back that up, they back it up with the fact that their business is now national. And they've done that for themselves, so they can do it for you. It's not talk, it's action. Matt and Darren at Congruity, they can handle it. Go to Congruity, matt@congruityhr.com, get your free assessment. Tell them Inside Carolina sent you. Tell them Greg Barnes sent you. They'll give you a free assessment. Greg Barnes, we talked before this show that we were going to hit on the schedule here. North Carolina's played Minnesota. I still say Minnesota is one of the best states in the union. What a great trip that was. Folks should go there. Played Charlotte. They got Central, and then they've got James Madison. Let's talk about this schedule here. I think it's worked out perfectly for this team, to be honest. But when you look at it on the outside, you say, what in the hell are they doing playing these teams? Well, it all ends up working out. Your thoughts?
Yeah, for sure. And I've got a lot of data points here that we can get to. But I think number one is Carolina through 2 games ranks 57th in terms of strength of schedule in ESPN FBI. And they have the easiest schedule remaining, 75th nationally. And this we knew, we've talked about this offseason, this was not going to be a challenging schedule for North Carolina. North Carolina could be a less quality team than what it was the last 2 years and potentially have a better record. And now with Max Johnson being out, we'll have to see how Connor Harrell comes along. But there's still a lot of opportunity here. And you're exactly right, Tommy. The way this sets up, we know Charlotte's not a very good team. Getting the win at Minnesota was critically important because if you don't have that win, then there's really question marks about what this team is. JMU, yeah, they beat Charlotte, but they struggled against Gardner-Webb last week. I think it was 13-6. So we don't know how good JMU is. That don't look that good right now. And then we know Central's going to be somewhat of a cakewalk. But these are opportunities early in the year to really get better. And that's what you have to do. And especially in a year like this year, you've got to accept that, embrace it. If you can get through the first 4 games at 4-0, regardless of the quality of opponent, you're going to take it. Especially with Harrell, trying to come along. I think that's very important. There's questions about how the schedule came to be. Let's kind of get into that. Mack Brown talked about how a lot of these games are scheduled so far in advance, and that is 100% true. The Minnesota series was originally scheduled over a decade ago, and then it was canceled. Carolina got $800,000 check out of it. And then they decided to reschedule back in 2018. So the first game, of course, was last year. So 5 years after it was scheduled when it was first played. Charlotte was scheduled back in 2015 for this year and next year. And if you think about it, that made a lot of sense. Charlotte was just coming on as a as a program, football program. And what Carolina was able to do, you sign a home and home, so you don't have to pay out money there. But what it does is you're able to go to Charlotte, which is one of your big recruiting hotbeds. You get exposure there. That's a smart idea to play a G5 team in that setup. James Madison was added during 2020, and then Central being an FCS, those kind of get added last minute whenever they can fit into the schedule. That was added in 2022. Mack has said before, and Larry Fedora talked about this. I think most coaches like this. You have one kind of primetime Power 5 game in the non-conference schedule. Then maybe you have a couple of G5 games, and then you have an FCS opponent. Larry Fedora, when he was here, he liked having that game before the NC State game against the FCS opponent. Mack said he doesn't like that, and that's one of the reasons some of these have been rescheduled to get earlier in the year so that you're not playing so many conference games early. And as poor as this schedule may be on the whole, if you look the next 2 years, Carolina plays TCU next year at home, and then they're at UCF. So 2 Power 5 schools. And assuming Gus is still UCF, that's going to be a tough game. And then 2026, you got Notre Dame at home, and then you're at TCU, and you're also at UConn. So we're going to have different conversations. Now, let's get to the fun stuff. I looked this up today. If you go back to 2001, John Bunning's first year, I thought these were pretty interesting. That team finished 8-5, which is the same as last year's team. Now, of course, last year's team played a weak schedule. It was ranked 71st. Well, that 01 team, that schedule was 16th nationally.
Is that the hardest schedule Carolina's ever played?
No, I'm getting to that. Oh, yeah, hang on. So they didn't have FPI back then, but Jeff Sagarin had Carolina ranked 23rd in 2001. They were 8-5. Last year, FPI, Carolina was 30th. And the key part of that is competition. Strength of schedule is difficult. Last year, Carolina played 2 top 25 teams at Clemson and at NC State. Clemson was number 20. NC State was number 21. And those rankings are at the end of the year. That's the final AP rankings. I don't care what the team was ranked when you play them. How did they finish the year? The 01 team played 5 teams in the top 25 and 2 teams in the top 10. They played number 5, Texas, at Texas. Number 6, Oklahoma, at Oklahoma. Number 11, Maryland, at Maryland. And then they played number 15, FSU, which was a beatdown, Jason, 41-9.
Sure was.
And then they lost that game at Georgia Tech, which was really pivotal for Carolina. That was a great game. Joe Hamilton, Georgia Tech finished the season at 24th. So think about it from that standpoint. Both of those teams, 01 and 23, were both 8-5. Although if you start looking at the metrics and consider the strength of schedule, that 01 team was a little bit better. Now you ask about difficult schedules. I don't know about some of the teams back in the 70s and earlier. But let's go back to 2004. North Carolina ranked first nationally in strength of schedule. That team was actually really good with Darian Durant, and they had a chance to win the Coastal. Virginia Tech came to town, and Carolina wasn't able to get it done.
That was the Tyrod Taylor.
That's right.
Roughing the passer, Ron Cherry call. What?
And Carolina had I think they went for it on 4th down inside Virginia Tech territory late, and were not able to convert. That team finished 6-6. Sagarin, they were ranked 35th. They played 7 top 25 teams that finished the year ranked, and 10 top 10 teams. Listen to this. This is wild. They played number 23 Virginia, number 21 Boston College in the bowl game, number 15 FSU, number 11 Miami, number 10 Virginia Tech, number 6 Louisville, Bobby Petrino. I don't know if that was the whistle game or not. And then
That's
number 4 was Utah when our buddy from Florida was out there. I mean, that is a brutal schedule. They played 3 top 10 teams.
Yeah, that wasn't the whistle game because that Louisville game was at home, I believe, that year. I can't remember. Okay. Anyway.
They played 3 top 10 teams in 2004. Carolina has played 3 top 10 teams in the past 7 years. And John Bunning put it together for one season back in 04.
John Bunning. Who'd have thought John Bunning was playing the hardest schedule ever? By the way, folks, if you're listening, certain media members need to listen to as well. Carolina in 2028 plays at South Carolina. They play Kennesaw State, which on College Football 25, they're about to win their third straight national championship. They play they play A&T and James Madison. Way out in 2036, Notre Dame at Notre Dame on November the 8th. So these schedules, to your point, Greg, are set so far in advance, it's tough to know because Rutgers with Ray Rice was no good when that game was scheduled. And then they came in and just wore Carolina out. Utah wasn't.
Yeah, Utah, like Urban Meyer. Who would have thought that team would be what they were at the time?
Yeah, so, I mean, you play who's on the schedule. I think the schedule's worked out perfectly for North Carolina. Given the injuries, given everything with the quarterbacks, I think it's an opportunity. Maybe you want Central to be a little better than they are, but the bottom line is Carolina talks about playing to the standard. We'll see. Jason, I told you we'd last an hour. It's 51 minutes in. We're done. We haven't even done predictions yet. So take your papers out, write your predictions down, and we'll get to it. I'll remind everybody of our sponsors, Congruity and Johnny T-shirt. Shout out for somebody that recognized my shirt. This is actually a KISS Army shirt, proud member since 1975. Every Thursday, I'm gonna try to dust off the old closet and pull out some old shirts. So shout out to that. While y'all are looking at that, I will look at some questions, see if I can answer them. Will Goss overtake Barlow? Barlow's got to play. I mean, if he's injured, availability
Barlow's
is
the
an
better
issue.
back at this stage, but availability is the most important ability.
100%. How many defensive snaps for 17 and 23? That would be Amari Campbell and Power Eccles. I don't know. It depends on how many snaps Central has. I said they play at least 75% of those offensive snaps.
What have you seen to suggest otherwise?
Exactly. Here you go. Sam and Drake obviously had a lot of self-confidence. Be another difference between them and Harrell. Can self-confidence be developed? I think you get more and more confident as you get more and more comfortable. And I think that's a big thing for Connor Harrell. Greg, you agree with that?
I do. Yeah, it's you got to get comfortable with what you're supposed to do first. Then you get comfortable within the framework of the offense, and then you start having success. And all those things work together. And the more success you have, the more belief in yourself that you have. Everybody at this level has belief in themselves. They have confidence. But to see success play out in front of you is a big next step. And you just got to have that happen.
Got to see the ball go in the basket.
Yep. Roy Williams, it all looks better when it goes in the basket. And if it doesn't go in the basket, I don't care how good you are, it hurts your confidence a little bit. So I think that's a great question there from WH1315. Scott Dawson asks, should Carolina players watch Duke UConn at 6 p.m. on Saturday? If you've listened to Mack Brown talk, he gives out assignments for players when the teams on the future schedule that are playing. He gives out assignments for kids to pay attention to. That's a little bit close to the Carolina. Well, I think Carolina and Duke play at 6 o'clock, so I'm sure there'll be plenty of film work there. But yes, they watch games of opponents they have to see later. All right. We ready for predictions, boys? As y'all talk, I'm going to throw up some. Greg, you're going first.
Okay, so Carolina's favored about 37.5 in this game. I was looking back.
Jason, already.
I was looking back. I think the biggest upset by a FCS opponent against a Power 5 school was just a couple years ago. And dang, now that I think about it, Liberty I don't think was FCS at that point in time. Oh, well. Liberty was 36.5 point underdog against Baylor when they went into Waco and won in 17. So that's kind of what we're talking about in terms of some of the biggest upsets in college football history. It ain't going to happen for Central this weekend, unfortunately. But it's going to be a nice day, and it should be a good opportunity for a lot of people to play. I've got Carolina winning this one big, 42-3.
42-3. Is that field goal come at the end of the game, or does that come early after a turnover or something?
Second half.
Second half field goal. Jason Staples, you're up. Predictions: North Carolina hosts Central.
I'm gonna. First question is Ditka full size?
Make sure you say that fully and correctly, and people don't know what you. I just don't repeat
Yes.
it, please.
Yes.
Is Ditka full size?
Okay, just want to make sure people heard the "ka." Give me your predictions.
Yeah. So I'm gonna go with NC Central 6, North Carolina 48. The main number not on the scoreboard is any significant injuries, and hopefully that one's a 0. That's the one that really matters. So, got to get out with a win, of course. But if they don't, then there's bigger problems to talk about on the day after.
Yeah.
But should be in that range. So we'll see.
George Jenkins, 78-10. Whew, I don't know if they've got that.
Larry
in them.
Fedora is not walking through that door.
They'll run the football too much and the clock runs way more now these days. It's much harder to put that kind of number up if you're going to run the ball a lot now.
Yeah, I'll say 41-7. I think they give up a touchdown. So 41-7. Greg, I think you won the Buck Sanders Award on his morning after column. I got it against Minnesota. You got it against against Charlotte.
Yeah, you
Jason,
dang near picked the score against Charlotte.
Greg had that. I had it against Minnesota. I had 17-15. It was 19-17.
We've
But
done pretty good thus far. 2 weeks in.
yeah, we're right on schedule for whatever we picked in the preseason. I'll let folks have to research that. Anything left? Will either one of you? So somebody in the tailgate asked me, were we ever going to see Jason Staples or Greg Barnes at the tailgate show? By the way, folks, Inside Carolina Live starts at 3:00 in the Bowls lot. Any
I haven't
chance
been
we get
asked to
Greg?
come in a couple of years.
Okay,
Me-
well, I've got
me either,
2
but-
tickets for you, Greg. You can come to the game Saturday. There you
Wow.
go. See, look. There you go.
nice.
See. It's a great game. It's a great atmosphere. Jason, are we ever going to be blessed with your presence down there?
It may well happen.
I heard somebody ask, would you ever be down there?
It may well. I mean, I haven't been there in a couple of years, but I mean, it's just a little harder for me right now because of the young children. But there'll be a point, maybe this year, where I'll be able to make it up.
Carolina has 7 home games. They've had 1 so far, another one this week, another one next week. That's Greg Barnes. That's Jason Staples. We're sponsored by Johnny T-Shirt and Congruity. It's been the Game Plan Podcast. Shout out to everybody that's joined us. Shout out to everybody that paid attention to the NIL story or the Smith Center story that Greg and I did earlier. Shout out to Joey Powell and the crew in the Bowls lot. Denora Cersei will be back. I think there's a player guest coming down there. A former Tar Heel will liven it up as well. And as always, I'll amble over, see what's going on. Jason, Greg, appreciate it.
Thanks. Told you we wouldn't get